Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, from two former Chancellors to the current Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell has been to the City of London today. He's told the financiers they'd be invited to help form a Labour government's economic policy, but they should be prepared for the party to intervene.
There are some policies that you'll like and some, well, you'll be less than enthusiastic about. And I don't expect people to be overjoyed having to pay a bit more income tax or corporation tax or at the introduction of a financial transaction tax. But most people recognise with us the need for large-scale investment in both our infrastructure and new technology, but also in our human capital with investment to raise standards in our education system, training and research and development.
Well, John McDonnell's not the only figure from the left of politics going to the City today with a potentially awkward message. Our guest of the day, Billy Bragg, has also been invited, rather surprisingly, to speak at the Bank of England this evening. He says he's not going to be calling for the overthrow of capitalism, but a change in the country's economic model. So are they ready to be convinced? Well, sadly, the Governor of the Bank of England wasn't available, but we're joined by the next best thing, the financial analyst Louise Cooper. If not the best thing, Louise, welcome. Welcome to the...
Mark Carney's pay scale, but never mind.
Something to aspire to. Billy, convince Louise about what you're going to say this evening.
Well, basically what I'm going to say this evening is, in some ways, what John was talking about there in terms of intervention. For the last 30-odd years, we've allowed the free market to more or less have its free will within our economy without really regulating it in the way it's regulated past after 1945. After the Second World War, there was a whole economic program that was aimed at narrowing the inequality gap, and that did narrow year on year. There was investment in schools, there was investment in hospitals, in infrastructure, but since 1980 that gap was widened, and I think that now when we're leaving things like quantitative easing to sort of go into the economy and do its business all on its own, it hasn't really done it. It hasn't really filtered through to the real economy where you and I spend our money. So what I'm saying is that it needs some more direction. It needs to go to ordinary working people rather than into the financial sector where it more or less stays.
So this is the point where you cheer?
I think it's brilliant you're going to the Bank of England. I really do. I think
Who for?
Well, no, just to encourage a debate.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily agree with what you say.
I'm sure they won't.
But I think it's I have to say, absolutely brilliant. The Bank of England has got this process of opening up, speaking to ordinary people. It's going around to businesses and schools. I think this is brilliant, and it's great you're there. With QE, let's start with QE.
Quantitative easing, yep.
I do disagree, OK? There are something like 11 million mortgages in this country, something like 19 million households. QE ripped down the cost of a mortgage hugely. It gave vast sums of money to anybody in this country with a mortgage. So I disagree. It really has had a huge impact. It's ripped down the cost of borrowing for companies that has enabled them to invest and to hire people. And we had phenomenal job creation in the last 5 years.
Right. I mean, isn't that true?
Well, unfortunately, what quantitative easing has done is it's really helped people with assets. You know, what it's done in effect is redistributed wealth upwards. It's made the wealthy more, the wealthy even more wealthy, and so it's those people who don't have mortgages, those people who'd like to get on the housing ladder, those people who have aspirations. They're really the people that we need to make feel secure, because when it comes down to brass tacks, it's actually consumers that drive growth, and they need to feel confident and they need to feel secure. Now, all that QE money has been spent to make the corporations feel secure, and they've more or less kind of hung on to it because they're nervous about what might be around the corner. What we need to do is redirect it into the real economy to make consumers feel secure, and secure, I say, secure in their jobs, secure in their health, secure in their tenancy, and that's how you really build proper growth in an economy rather than just ramping up the financial sector.
Like I said, QE doesn't just ramp up the financial sector, it does have...
Mostly does, though, doesn't it?
But did it just help people who already had assets?
OK, so the downside to QE is it's driven assets up. And the fact it's driven property prices up is hugely damaging to the social structure of this country. Absolutely. And central bankers all over the world are grappling with the problem that really low interest rates have, which is they ramp up assets. So absolutely it's true. It is also true that if you don't spread the wealth of an economic recovery, then there will be a political backlash that could be anti-business and could damage the economy for the long term. So we do need to spread the wealth. The IMF actually said in its recent World Economic Outlook that the danger of not spreading wealth, and we're not spreading wealth because wages have not gone up in the last decade.
But there's other things as well, like funding for lending. You know, give it to lending money to the banks. What the knock-on effect of that has meant the banks haven't had to get their money from the public, so they haven't offered high interest rates to encourage spenders to come in because they can get all this free money from the government. So it's for savers, for people who want to invest, you know, small, medium enterprises or just ordinary citizens can't get the interest rates that allows them to make money on what they have.
It is true that low interest rates have discouraged savings. That's another problem of QE and extremely low interest rates.
And these are exceptional things. I mean, QE and these zero interest rates almost, this is exceptional, isn't it? This is not like normal economics.
No, it's not, and it's an experiment, and no one knows quite where it will end up.
Here's the key thing, Joe. I would argue this is not a crisis in capitalism. It's a crisis in accountability. It's because the financial system is not accountable to ordinary citizens in any way that we're in this trouble.
Do you still think now, all these years after the crash, when it first happened in 2008, that people still feel that they, who weren't involved in causing the crash, had to bear quite a lot of the burden of what happened, and bankers who, in some people's minds, did cause it, haven't?
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But we can go around pointing fingers about what happened and how it happened. What we need to do is make sure that where we are now, we move to a more positive place. For instance, the amount of profits that are given to shareholders, I think the percentage is far, far too high. And what I would like to see is that profits are equally divided among shareholders, long-term investment and the workforce. And in order to do that, we'll talk about accountability, we need to have workers on boards as a statutory measure, not just as something that would be nice.
Which Theresa May talked about and then didn't actually do. Would you be in favour of that and more regulation?
OK, so I disagree about the accountability. We have a press, we have Parliament. So for example...
The press didn't see the crash coming, did they? Nobody saw the crash coming.
Billy,
because there was no fence.
Give me a chance. Give me a chance. OK, so, for example, you know, you look at companies avoiding tax. It's been in the press, and you've started to see companies change. You've started to see the government policy change. OK, so it's slow. It's probably not as quick as you want it to. For example, on energy prices, we know that 60 to 70% of households are still on the standard variable tariff that rips them off by hundreds of pounds. And we've seen Theresa May say we're looking at, you know, having a price cap. So we do have a press and we do have a Parliament, and they do hold individuals accountable. And as a consumer, if you don't like Starbucks not paying tax or Cafe Nero not paying tax, all you need to do, stop buying coffee there.
All right. And on that note, thank you very much for coming in.
Pleasure.